I know we have our rep set up every Saturday or every one Saturday a month at the library. We have to go now, 10 o'clock.
Not the grades.
No, it's
Just
We're live 7 month.
okay. All right, we are live this morning. This is the Senate Transportation Committee. Welcome, everyone. Our discussion this morning with Tom Cavett. Tom is looks at our future and our finances, and welcome you this morning. We haven't had you here, but we're welcoming you and give us a little upgrade of what's happening. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much. The document that you have in front of you is what was presented to the emergency board yesterday and then approved as part of the budget parameters affecting revenues that will be coming in. And for the most part, page one kind of summarizes what's going on. In the external economy, there are these two seismic forces kind of pushing against each other. One is a huge amount of federal money that's come through, and you're certainly well aware of this with infrastructure stuff that affects transportation, but also all the monies around the pandemic that is just unprecedented. I mean, there just has never been this kind of flow of money from the federal government to the states and to individuals. And it's coursing through the economy in lots of different ways. And a lot of that money still hasn't hit the street. You know, I mean, it came down. There were some of these CIP programs that I was involved with the ACCD. They had an economic filter. They were trying to target them a little bit better. So we were doing kind of ranking them based on economic impact that might have on the state, economic benefits. And they're only just now, some of the last projects are just now like getting dollars that are going to, they're building affordable housing or childcare, whatever they're building, and they're just getting started. So even though it looks like, oh, that's over.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
Go to the website.
On the front page, so these are adjustments
to the July.
to July forecast.
That's right.
Is the transportation fund, even though the adjustment is down $1 million, is it still up from?
Now this is relative to July,
Right.
but you mean up from the prior year?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the tables that have all the data and history on that are at the end of the report.
Because that's what we built our
Transportation.
budget on, was the January one.
Oh, not July.
The prior January. That's
Okay, okay. So,
Because you can't,
oh, so it wouldn't even
fiscal
be
year begins
fiscal-
July 1st, so you have to use,
Yeah,
you can't use the July forecast. 'cause
right, but it wasn't the July actual either for the prior year.
You don't.
So page 40 has the table with the transportation fund monies, but so available 2023 is up 3.9% from fiscal 22, but I'm not sure what was in the last budget. Chris, I don't know if you.
We ended FY22 significantly below forecast.
Okay.
In July. So the actuals that were collected were across both the T fund and the TIP fund.
Yeah.
304.9 million last year, and that was significantly off from the forecast at the end of the year. The forecast now shows FY23 coming in at 320.9 across both funds. So that's an increase of $16 million year over year.
You don't believe this is a one-off, right? We are just seeing and anticipating an increase in revenues into the T fund unless we correct some of our sources.
That's just fair.
Forecast.
Okay, so but relative to what's on page 40,
I'm including the TIP as well.
you're including TIP. Okay, okay. Yeah, TIP is weird because it used to be totally separate. And, you know, the money, it was sort of set up as a way to avoid saying we're having a tax increase. You know, I mean, it was the tax increase, but it was done through financing a bond. And I worked with the treasurer on that whole thing. And it, there was a lot of capacity and everything else, but I guess as those are discontinued, that money is just flowing into the regular chief.
It's used on a pay-as-you-go basis in the
Yeah.
agency budget.
Yeah.
And there are
okay.
parameters around the use of TIP funds.
Correct.
Yeah,
Because there's no bond payment, so it just.
Correct.
There is no bond payments going to be paid it off, remembering that this past year's.
and maybe we should call it a part of the available transportation fund if that's how it's being used rather than carrying it below the line. If you're counting that in.
I count it because there are times, and this is happening right now in the Budget Adjustment Act, where sometimes the revenue is a little cold in one fund and a little hot in the other, and an adjustment needs to be made.
Yeah, well, it changes the mix of the gasoline tax because of the way it's done, it's a price-based thing that's different from motor fuel assessment tax, but still has that element, so it provides a little bit of diversity in terms of revenue flow from that. It's gonna swing up and down more with price, but and then FIP diesel's nothing more than a little bit more the same.
3 cents a gallon.
Yeah, right, so it just doesn't really do much.
When
but-
does the federal monies dry up of this extra bonus coming in again this year, right?
Oh, the infrastructure money, that's just starting.
It's just starting. It's going to be with us for a while. It is a 5-year bill, and each year you have 3 extra years to obligate the funds. So there's quite a long tail on it. And we're at Senator Kitchell noted, we're at the very early stages of rolling out the money.
Yeah, and even some of that is sort of, you kind of have to apply for it, isn't that?
Yeah, there's a lot of.
No, exact, it's not just formulaic.
It's both.
Yeah.
We're looking to see about a 50% increase just in the formula funds over the life of the bill compared to the life of the last one.
Right. So that, that's a whole different angle on what's happening. And again, just order of magnitude larger in terms of potential money that's around. So to your point about taxes, what it looks like here, not a lot of growth if you're using that to pay for things that this fund would otherwise be paying for is a whole different picture. The only caveat to that, and this is a really important point with all of the forecast numbers, is that there are pre-pandemic dollars and post-pandemic dollars. And what the post-pandemic dollars will buy is far less than the money that we're used to seeing. If we had $100 million, here's what we could do. Now that $100 million, certainly in way of capital projects, like a lot of the transportation stuff, it's just buying a lot less. In some cases, as little as half of what it previously would buy. And so that's really important in the budget process. We just look at the revenues. We hardly do anything with expenses. With the education fund, we do some, we do some student enrollment things and stuff like that. That's an expense side part of it, but there's not a comparable kind of 5-year expense budgeting process that looks at inflation and maybe even stress tested with different inflation levels. But the cost overruns that we've seen with projects early on, so far, and these are all different kinds of projects, non-residential, non-building, whatever, it has been dramatic.
I saw one bid, it went out for 10 million, we anticipated 10 million, and it came in at 16 million for paving. It was 6 million over.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 6 million on the $10 million project, that's a big, that was just one I haven't noticed. One thing I
Right.
wanted to be-
So,
Right.
Tom, that 5-year thinking about spending, would you have forecasted this level of inflation?
No, but what you can do with a forecast is now that you know that, this is likely, you can plug that in and you can make it specific to the sectors that you're involved in spending the money. If it's a
So you
whole
can
bunch
see
of
what the
labor, it's
impact
one
would
thing.
be.
Yeah, you see what the impact would be. And then if it goes up or down, you can adjust that and understand how that's going to affect that whole flow going out for a extended period of
It'd
time.
be interesting to see what transportation brings in their plan, because they had already started experiencing this cost. Obviously petroleum based.
Well, look at salt alone, went from $4 a ton to $800 a ton, just to salt. That's just
Yeah.
one item, that's just simple, yes.
And Tom, so this table on page 40, just so I understand it. So these are actual revenue increases from this year, and then the change is the change from the prior year on the actuals, but on the forecast, it's just from a change to the prior year forecast, the January forecast. All right.
This is when I talk about the change on the page 1,
Yeah,
it's saying relative to the last time there was a
right. I get
official
that,
forecast
but on this,
on page 40, it's just the stats. So fiscal 22 is an actual, fiscal 23 is our forecast. So it's just what we're saying now about how much more money is going to come in. So you can see, like, longer term. And if there's a 5-year table,
but it's like the 23 forecast percent change. Is that a percent change of the actual, or is it percent change of the forecast?
well, the forecast 2023 is still a forecast, and 2022 is an actual. We have half the year.
Because on the first graph, page 1, it's a difference of the forecast to forecast.
That's right.
But on 40, it's forecast.
It's like an adjustment, mid-year adjustment to the forecast.
But not page 40, this is more like the change to that from the actuals.
Yeah, it's saying with the change, here's what you get on an annual basis. But the other page 1 says, remember what we
Right,
told
yeah.
you in July? We're changing that.
Changing what was-
And in the case of the transportation fund, we're hardly changing it at all.
Right.
I mean, as a percentage to be down $1 million is, I know, again, what used to be a bigger number, a bigger problem now is like, oh, that's nothing. If it's 10 million, it's sort of like, oh, that's nothing. But yeah, it's pretty small, but the direction is slightly negative. And that's not true in any other fund. What we're seeing is more strength in the economy. The problem is the stuff that we get money through transportation on has been weaker. And that has to do with the basis of the tax that are the fuel taxes, where there's a lot of it is per gallon. And so unless there's a lot more use and demand, that doesn't go up. And the only one that really benefits, and then a bunch of fees and things that are just fixed and kind of demographically related. And they don't change. Yeah, they change in steps, whenever those change. But the only one that sort of is in the mix with general economy and benefits from inflation is motor vehicle purchase and use. And chunk of that gets given away to the education fund. So
You don't have a chart on that, do you?
Purchase and use.
a chart, a separate chart?
Yeah, can't remember.
No, I don't think vehicle inventories on vehicle lots. There's a chart of that. Just saying, we would have a lot more 33. Yeah, okay. We'd have a lot more vehicle sales if there were cars available. That's been the big limitation.
That's the inventory on the dealer's lots.
Oh, that's inventory? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
From
I mean, it's been
93
low,
to
but
20.
Wow.
so we knew it was low during the pandemic of semiconductor chips and everything else, but we thought it would resolve a little bit faster. What's happened though is it pushed up the price, so the prices of new and used cars
Discounting, right?
are
Higher.
like
Oh, yeah.
30% higher than pre-pandemic.
That's right.
So that's about 10% a year over the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we're getting more per sale, but there could be a lot more sales.
Yeah, that nobody's discounting automobiles. In fact, they're going over sticker, which is troublesome to me, but they've done well financially.
You indicated most people finance the purchase of their vehicle.
85% new cars are
So,
financed and about 53% used cars are.
so interest rate increase.
Is going to dent it. It's just that there's so much savings that's not going to be as quick as we thought, as normally it would be. When the Fed starts putting on the brakes, as it is now, trying to slow the economy, it does it through interest rate sensitive sectors. And housing, of course, is the biggest one. It's pretty much double the effective price of a house with a 30-year mortgage. If you look at the whole
Wow.
payment
Wow.
versus January.
Gee, time to buy your car.
Yeah, so with cars, you know, you've got, if it's financed, that's gonna be harder. And also
I don't finance my car.
people, yeah, right. But the people that are prone to finance are also typically lower income. And so you're gonna be more stressed in general with a lot of what else is happening in the economy. And certainly anybody that's taking on credit card debt. So one of the first things that happened with the pandemic money is the credit card balances got paid way down. And household balance sheets have looked great. But now that debt is increasing. It's not quite back where it was pre-pandemic, but there's still a lot more credit card debt.
The chips seem to play so much into probably a lot of your predictions, as far as it just seems to be,
Semiconductors.
yeah.
Yeah.
Why? I don't want to get you off subject, why hasn't that resolved itself?
That's not off subject. That's very much on subject. Actually, there's a bit of a glut now with chips, and
That's why
This is-
Global Foundries laying off.
it's like well, they have internal stuff going on too. I mean, a company that's basically run by a sovereign wealth fund, even though they went public, is still like a little bit screwy in terms of the whole mix of things. But this is what happens in an economy when there are quick shifts between areas of demand. So the industry tries to respond, produce more, and then the mix of the kinds of things they're producing can be not quite right. And those swings in demand are really problematic. There are enough chips now being produced. There are too many. And so they'll get to the cars eventually, but the process to have that flow, have the vehicles assembled, then the vehicles out on the lots and then bought, just have some lags. So I would expect that chart to be looking better soon. But, you know, that's been a problem. Most of the chips are produced in Taiwan. Taiwan Semiconductor is the big player, like
I'm having
90%.
lunch with Wellington on Friday.
Yeah,
Well, they have an office in Boston because they're not a recognized nation because of that relationship with mainland China.
yeah,
So they try to establish very strong relationships with states, and of course there's just a tremendous amount of trade
Yeah.
between Vermont and Taiwan.
yeah. No, it's
Particularly in this area of production.
yeah. No, they show up on all the export data, import-export data that you see.
In any of the modeling on the gas tax revenue streams that we're seeing decline, is there any cliff that is looked out at the adoption of the electronic vehicles that we need to be more conscientious of as we start to bring online other
We're
revenue?
talking about that every year, but we gotta do something pretty soon.
Well, we
It's
have a
baked in the
report.
forecast. So that is a part, yeah, it's part of the decline, long-term. You look at the 5-year forecast for gas, it's going down.
Sure.
But this chart isn't in the forecast. I don't know. I maybe have 3 or 4 just to pass around and look at. But this is gas gallons over a long period of time.
Scale of
So these are
77.
seasonally adjusted annual rates, and that's like in millions or something. This is an internal set of data that we use as part of it. I would say 95% of the data we use to analyze stuff it never shows up or gets circulated. But all the state series that we look at, we seasonally adjust. So when you hear numbers from the Department of Commerce or whatever, they're always seasonally adjusted annual rates and things like that. So tax revenues have never been reported as that, but all our analysis happens with seasonally adjusted data that we run through programs that adjust for seasonality. So gasoline sales have seasonality to it, even though if you did it based on consumption, it would be better. But all we have is sort of from the wholesaler. And so there can be purchases there that are highly irregular. And so that's where the revenue from the gas tax is coming from. But if you look at what the implied gallons are, and this starts in 1985 and goes right up to the current, you'll see that pretty much peaked like 2004-05, and then it's been declining, you know, to varying degrees. When prices are really high, it'll sometimes drive demand down. When they're lower or stabler, that'll flatten off. But in the pandemic, there was this big downward swing. That's what that big drop at the end is people just weren't driving in the pandemic, but it hasn't come back nearly as much as we thought it would. We thought, all right, you know, once it's over, people will start doing what they did
Well,
before.
we're back to work. I mean,
A lot of
that's
people
the
are-
big thing.
they're
They're all
all-
working from home.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
There's almost, I was talking about this, and I talk about with business owners all the time. And one of the conversations I had last weekend was, there's just been a part of our life that's been sucked out of us. And people just haven't found that back yet. They just haven't found their old habits back, what they used to go and do. And a lot of the businesses are seeing that. You go in and the excitement isn't what it used to be, and the crowds aren't what they used to be. And for whatever reason, people have either found a new way or whatever it is. It could be fear or change of habit or whatever it might be, but we haven't found our way back yet.
Yeah.
And it's hard to figure that out.
Well, it is, and that's a part of the forecast that we're doing, is trying to figure that stuff out. But there are changes that were clearly related to the pandemic.
Yes.
And then the question is, how persistent will they be? And remote work, on balance, is something that is highly beneficial to the state of Vermont. On the income tax side of the spectrum, we're getting a ton of additional money from people who are working at home. And as broadband improves, that completely changes.
Why are we making more money if they're working?
If they're earning it here.
If they previously worked in Boston or New York
Oh,
or
I see.
whatever, now they're working in a second home or
Oh,
at a
okay,
place
yeah.
in Vermont.
I didn't know how to state.
Yeah. So it's for people that are out of state
I
that
see,
can
okay,
come.
okay.
And Vermont was very much kind of a refuge
Yeah,
state
yeah,
in
yeah.
COVID. You know, if it was
Right,
socially distant to
right,
begin
yeah.
with, and then it had very good stats in terms of safety, and
Okay,
so a lot
yeah.
of people came. So we've had a lot of immigration from that, but people couldn't do that. You know, people who might have wanted to move to Vermont but couldn't because they were tethered to their job could all of a sudden work remotely. There was a guy who was hiking up in Putney Mountain area and ran into a guy from New York, and he works for one of the broadcast networks, and he said he'd always wanted to move to Vermont,
Right.
vacation there and
Now
everything
you
else.
do it.
And during the pandemic, he did an Airbnb up there for an extended period of time, and he just loved it. And now everybody in New York's used to it.
Yeah,
So he
yeah,
just bought a house and has moved up, and
yeah.
you know, and those are high-paying jobs.
Whoever
So-
heard of that 20 years ago?
What's that?
Whoever heard of that 20 years
Yeah.
ago, or 10 years ago?
Right.
Yeah, whatever.
Well, and the way we do meetings and stuff, with
Yeah.
all this, and it very quickly was just sort of, except we didn't know if it was going to be temporary though, and that's true with lots of aspects of this. Now we know the federal largesse is pretty much temporary, but then the whole infrastructure spending was, you know, right after that. And they also got used to numbers like trillions instead of hundreds of billions. A $250 billion, you know, expenditure thing in Washington was a big deal 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, there were
Right.
presidential candidates running, you know, and they were saying, "Oh, I'm going to spend 250 billion on
Right.
infrastructure," and it was like, "Whoa, you can't do that."
Crazy.
Yeah, it's like, you know, 2 trillion
Yeah.
or 3 trillion or something, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So I don't think you can expect that sort of thing to keep going. I mean, obviously the federal deficit is very high, and
They're gonna shut down if they don't raise them.
well, that's just a shutdown thing. That's more shooting ourselves in the foot, but
Right.
that's a different story altogether. We haven't played that out because every other time it's
Yeah.
comes to the
Yeah.
brink and then
Oh,
they
yeah.
change it. But knowing what might be permanent, what isn't, is a big part of the I don't know with the forecast, and we have to watch how it develops. And it hurts though, the gas tax. It's one of generally on balance, it's helping the state, but it hurts the gas tax because
Yes, Tom.
So this is a great chart. That's my follow-up question right on that point. So I would look at 2004, and I guess I'd be curious if there's any reason to believe this is the fact it's sustainable, but or to the verifiable, but this must have been the adoption of increased purchases of hybrids and more fuel efficient vehicles. My question has to do with, we are seeing a large injection at the federal and state levels for electric vehicle adoption rates, that if you zero out this Y scale, is there any modeling anticipating any major drop off in gas tax revenues as all these electric vehicles that are being so incentivized? And if so, what is the time frame? Are we looking at 2 years, 5 years out?
Yeah.
And if so, what scale, time scale?
Yeah, I should have put the forecast on it, but yeah, we have to have a forecast that goes out. That's what drives the, part of it. So we had thought this was gonna come back up closer to where it would have been related to that. Then Russia invades Ukraine. And so all of a sudden gas prices go way up. Well, that could be good for parts of the T-fund, because the motor fuel assessment tax, the way that formula works, it has to get up to about 38? 387, but yeah, and then it's lagged, so you're not getting, the timing is a coincidence, but it has to get up pretty high before that rate really starts to go up, and then we get more money. Well, we got there, for a little while, but the forecasts in July were for higher prices. All of a sudden, those have been resolved, both by a really warm winter in Europe, and also the way markets work. This is what a free market economy does, is it there's so much money to be made by being creative and figuring out how to get supplies where they need to go, that it happens. And so prices have come back down. That totally takes the wind out of the sail of motor fuel assessment and TIP. But at the same time, we haven't had a resurgence in the volume. So that little uptick, so before what we were saying is that's going to decline and going to accelerate. The decline will accelerate with EV adoption. EV adoption had been pretty slow. I mean, there's a lot of talk about it, and the auto companies are saying by 2050 we're going to be this completely, or some are saying 2030, like Volvo and a few other. Aside from Tesla, in terms of actually implementing something that's workable. I mean, I don't know if any of you have EVs and drive them, but it's having the ability to charge an electric vehicle quickly is a really important piece of it.
That's going to be the key.
And Tesla's the only one that has a charging system that is pretty widespread and good in Vermont, because it's right along the interstate. Multiple stations in Vermont, and then a bunch of slower charging options at hospitality sites and things like that for people that are coming. But that's an overnight thing. I'm talking the governor, when he was talking about driving around in his new Ford F-50, the state vehicle that he uses. He was trying to do this visit every county in a day thing. You can't do it. But if he had a Tesla, he could, because he would have to really plan the trip.
Right.
But you could get to supercharging places where you can charge really quickly at those. So you can dip in for 15 minutes and get 100 miles or more, and it's fast. There are a bunch of them, and they're not clogged up. Ahead of time how many open spaces there are, and they have at some of them 16 chargers, so people are in and out. And
so they're that fast, and Teslas are that much different.
It's totally, that is a complete, so just the fact that nobody else can use it.
You can't, nobody else.
No, it's proprietary.
And a lot of them are just a single charge station in one car. And Tesla will have a bank of them.
Yeah, they have a minimum of 8.
All the country, in every state.
Yeah, you can drive coast to coast.
They put some money in.
Yeah.
There's tons of money. Each one of those $250,000 that, because it's a huge amount of power that comes into this thing in order to charge really quickly.
Wow, I know
But
they had them, but.
They
That's-
have an app system on an app system.
You have an app, and they can tell you if
If
they're
you're
working.
driving,
They'll chart your trip based on their charging.
That's what else.
If I could just crystallize the point I'm trying to make to see if Tom Cabot thinks I'm wrong, is just I anticipate that this is really from hybrid adoption, and I'm expecting that with EV adoption, which needs all the infrastructure you're talking about, we're going to see a steeper decline in gas tax revenues over a shorter period of time.
Okay, so that is not just hybrid adoption, it's price related stuff. So relatively high price accelerates that. And then the fact that it flattened out here was less of that price pressure. So that's one slope you could look at. That's another slope you could look at. That's actually more likely that adoption's not going to happen in a quick drop. It's not going to be like the pandemic. You know, that's like all of a sudden, you know, this gigantic swing in this. So if everybody had sort of a Tesla network and you could really use it like you use a gas car, and it's not even a Tesla, that's not where it's at. I mean, the best adoption for EV is if you kind of drive the same route every day and then you park it overnight and you can do a charge with like, you know, a regular 240 volt system or a bigger circuit, you know, but you can do like a 5-hour charge and completely charge it, or maybe a 7 or 8. The adoption of that will be pretty widespread. But until you can just use it any way you use a gas car, it's a little bit different. I think it'll slow down the adoption. And the problem now with all the credits and things that exist for EVs is they have the same problem with supply. Tesla's dropping price because they have a lot of production, but all the others, you're in a long line to get a hybrid car or a plug-in. What did you get?
The Ford Mustang,
Oh, okay, yeah.
18 months away.
Oh, okay,
When they first opened the reservations.
yeah,
I think when I first got a Prius, I waited something like that too, so.
yeah. Well, same with plug-in hybrids now. There are long waits for.
How much does it cost to plug in a Tesla? They charge at their station?
Yeah.
Well, some Tesla owners got free charging for life when they bought their Tesla.
The early sales included that, and they
Wow.
throw that in as a promotional item, something like 10,000 miles of free charge or whatever. It's cheaper than gas when you sort of fill up. It's usually like you know, $10 or $11, and they tell you. And that's the other thing. You don't, you know, once you have one, your credit card's on it. You just drive in and plug it in. There's no like swipe your card or do anything like.
Wow.
Yeah, right. So it's very fast. It's very easy. And the car, like you said, assists you with seeing. It knows your route and it'll tell you where places to charge are and all that. So, but the adoption, I think, is not going to be as fast in terms of on the ground stuff as you see, but it's going to keep declining. And that is baked into the forecast now. The 5-year forecast tables that are at the very end, like page 40, 40.
And this is thousands of gallons.
It's seasonally adjusted annual rate, so they're probably millions, right? Millions of gallons. Yeah, because it's an annual rate. Again, if I was going to distribute this, I would have prepared it like my other charts where you cite the source and everything else.
Sure.
But these are just internal, and we run them. You know, they're series like there's maybe 100 charts like this that we're kicking out to you. But I could dress it up if you want to use it or anything else. Yeah.
Well, right now, we've been tracking it, the revenue loss associated with EVs is minuscule.
Yeah.
And the advocates are basically saying to encourage take-up, we should, because we've been talking about how to replace the revenues associated with the gas tax. And I think the AOT is coming back with a proposal on vehicle miles traveled. But we also looked at, you know, like a surcharge on the registration that would have on average equate to the lost gas tax. And they're saying that they're recommending that we make that put in those taxing revenue methods once the take-up rate gets 15%. So we're not close to that now, I don't think. So.
No, what are the numbers now? It was the last time I looked.
I think it's still low single-digit percentages.
Yeah.
Like 6,000 vehicles.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just do a quick time check for the next committee, but
Oh, sorry, yeah.
one of the other things, just to, as we look at this, is, you know, do some back of the envelope math of what an average driver pays in gas tax a year. And, you know, it's not very much, it's under $150. So, you know, you're looking at less than $1 million a year of revenue loss from plug-in, full battery electric vehicles right now, most likely.
But we have out-of-staters too.
Sure.
But they're using the charging stations, usually
Unless
fast
they're,
charge.
charging.
Unless they're staying overnight.
That's what we want.
No, or they're buying gas.
Yeah, so maybe you could collect the revenue the way we do Airbnbs, you know, where you get it from Tesla, not from the individuals.
Charging station.
And they know
Yeah,
exactly.
we've talked about that.
They know exactly how much they're doing. You could surcharge that. I mean, and from a policy perspective, you're kind of at odds because you want there to be environmentally more electric vehicles and everything else. And so, but you also need money to keep the roads
Right.
intact and everything else. So, yeah, that's difficult spot to be in. Yeah.
And you have to have some mechanism for the people that are traveling through that are not Vermont residents, and they're
Right,
using
that's the
usually
tour.
the fast charge. And so there are ways, that's an easy probably way, that raising revenues on that particular system is probably pretty simple. It's for,
Yeah, that would only hit Tesla though, so you'd have to go then to the other entities that do charging
yes, you would,
stations.
you would have had it, yes.
Yeah.
Like Charge Point.
Yeah. Anyway, it's complicated. But Tom, the 5-year numbers are on page 46. I'm sorry, do we have another meeting that's
Yeah, 9:45.
Okay.
Where is that?
Upstairs.
there's a house transportation? Yeah. We're doing both.
Well, this is.
Yeah,
This has been very.
You've been on the other end.
Thank you for coming. That's really-
Yeah, I have been on the other end. Actually, we had to evacuate the building when Tom was next door.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interrupted the whole time.
We had a good day actually, because it was nice out.
Yeah, it was mild.
Doing the road show, it's really helpful.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
We're glad we can get down to some of this. Yeah, all right. Yeah, likewise.
Okay, your next is.
Send me the Zoom link, I can share my screen.
Bradley, you're the next one? Okay, come join
The
us.
links on the page.
Is it?
Listen.
Would you like me to?
Just sit right over there.
Present.
Yeah. Let's, this is,
Did you
two overview for us and, welcome everybody. Sure, yeah. That's good, yeah. So we're going to continue our discussion, I believe, about the financing. And Bradley, you're with us from AOT,
Yes.
and give us a little something about yourself. You're the chief financial officer.
Yes, good morning.
New levy?
I'm the new Lenny. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Agency of Transportation.
Okay, all right.
So under my purview is the finance unit for the agency, which we're kicking off our full finance and administration division
You handle all the money.
overview. So our group handles all the money. How would you like me to put this presentation on the screen?
Well, we like to follow it on the screen if we could. if
Yeah,
possible.
it's, I'm either gonna need to join the Zoom meeting or have Mike put it up there.
You want to share your screen? Can you
Maureen's
share a
prepared
screen?
to as well.
Or Maureen's who prepared to do it as well.
Do you have the Zoom link?
Probably, yeah.
I don't have it, but.
My apologies, I'm still getting used to this kind of
Yeah, okay.
login model. I got it now. We're cooking.
You were finishing it, right?
What?
You made doing it, right?
I know, we're working on the budget adjustment. What?
Remember?
She said the vice chair was really good.
I was about to share it.
How's he doing?
You can answer that later.
Examination. I think he's doing fine. I had no questions about that.
Wait for my review.
Yeah.
Right, your performance review.
Vice Chair on Transportation, that guy's the guy.
Wow.
How does that happen?
It's whether, has your vice chair showed up a lot?
The vice chair here is gone for a week.
We haven't had a vice chair in some time.
That's what happens when you have to work too.
It's a new senator.
Oh, here we are.
Alrighty.
Oh, he's getting feedback.
Sure, my. Oh, no, that's the deep.
How are we doing now? Okay.
There we go.
Thanks for bearing with me. Okay. Once again, thank you, committee, for having us in. Bradley Kuchenberger, Chief Financial Officer. I manage the finance unit, which, as the chair pointed out, handles all the money for the agency, all the ins and the outs. So we have separated into two units.
What's your total budget? 600 some odd million, is that?
The total FY23 budget was 838
Yeah, I
million.
checked it. We had a couple hundred million. Wow.
Yeah, so that really is,
That's the biggest, long time.
that's the biggest ever.
Yeah, ever, yeah.
And really that's attributable to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and our
Were we able,
efforts
were we
to-
able to spend it all?
um,
Are you wanting to get?
we're working on it.
Okay.
Halfway through the year, it's,
And how much?
so we, in order to spend it all, we have a couple of units under our finance. So we have a group that's dedicated towards budget and business support services with 13 individuals. And then we also have a financial operations section, which is your traditional and technical kind of finance units, accounting, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and the like. So in our budget and business support services section, we have 7 individuals who act sort of like business managers for the various programs and divisions across the agency. And they're in a group that's called Business Support Services. And we also have a federal programs unit, which there's 4 folks with each a massive amount of experience, none more so than Mr. Mark Kingsbury, who's been working with the agency for 62 years.
62?
62 years and going strong. He's a master, to say the least, of operating our federal programs.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm gonna.
So we have really a group of business managers who serve the divisions and programs around the agency. And then we have our federal programs unit who really, the bulk of our federal funds come through FHWA. So they work with them, constantly throughout every day on programming specific projects and with the overall goal of never lapsing a single penny if we can help it. They also provide and prepare the statewide transportation improvement program, which is referred to as the STIP, which the STIP along with our capital program is what gives us the authority to program our federally funded projects throughout the year.
So I wanted to go back to provides financial analysis of revenues and costs. We've just had, in the last couple of days, a lot of focus paid on inflation and the impact that's having on product costs, labor costs, et cetera. How are you, in preparing the budget that we're gonna be seeing? I assume you've had to reflect those higher costs that are a result of the current inflationary environment.
Yeah, so there's a process we go through, and this is generally on the project and program managers for the agency who own the specific programs and projects. They're constantly updating their project estimates. So when we prepare our capital program to present for the upcoming budget, it's really an aggregation of all that work. So while those estimates are being updated throughout the year, especially these past couple of years where we've had multiple large global events that have been spurring inflation, we've taken a really close look at it, and our team has been trying to help provide insight and ability to analyze maybe a little better than the traditional method of reviewing the bids that have come in for particular cost drivers, such as different types of materials, different types of projects. So we know that in the previous year, the inflationary percentage for structures that are primarily driven by steel were more substantial than something driven by paving, which while it's petroleum based, for whatever reasons, the data we were seeing, some paving projects were increasing costs and some projects were less. So we're able to kind of give guidance and help the project and program managers prepare the best estimates possible that we
Imagine
can
with
prepare
the
the budget.
underpass at Middlebury with the cost of today's world, of the drawbridge and North Zero, what it was today versus 3 years ago. And because I don't know how contractors bid a project with the costs going, they got bid like 3-4 months in advance.
They must, they have provisions now in most contracts that give them, I think for paving, isn't there something if cost exceeds a certain amount, then there's a provision to increase the compensation, kind of a stop loss almost.
Yeah, I might defer to our contract and admin chief, Jeremy Stevens. He's in the room. I don't know. He's going to be coming up here in a few minutes.
All right.
Do we have any other questions on any of those topics?
Any other question?
We'll move on to the other side of our shop, which is the pretty much daily continuous transactions of finance and also statewide financial reporting. So we have an accounting unit, which has 9 folks. They complete all of the statewide financial reporting. They do all of the accounting relative to the transportation fund. They review and coordinate all of the financial systems we use. So AOT uses our own separate financial system called STARS. It's built in 1994 and it works. It's a workhorse. However, that requires us to reconcile that on a frequent basis with the statewide accounting system. So we have folks who do that. And we also utilize their skill and talents to interpret processes, practices based on government accepted accounting practices and other regulations that we have to follow.
Did you need the STARS because just Vision hadn't started yet, like you were ahead of that, or just your accounting is different enough?
Yeah, so my historical understanding is the way we incorporate and have to reimburse by project. So we're a project-based organization, and the way we utilize our federal funds requires us to bill in a certain way. And at the time, this was the best option, and it's proven to be one of the best options to date. However, Since it was built in 1994 and it is a mainframe system, we are we will eventually run against the clock of people being able to maintain it. So part of one of our previous budgets has been I think it was fiscal year 23's budget or 2023's budget had some money set aside to start preparing for that. And then at the meantime, we're working with APS on how to incorporate a more modern system into our
It'd be similar, I think, a much grander scale than what's happening at DMV with their old mainframe system being changed over.
I don't think I'm ready to speak to the scale, especially I'm not an IT project manager, but they're both large undertakings at the very least. Yeah. We have an accounts payable unit. We process roughly 40 to 50,000 payments a year. Every 2 weeks, we pay contractors through what's called the biweekly estimate. And we do that every other week, except for 1 week at the end of the year when we have to transition from one fiscal year to the next. And we're working with working on our process to try to smooth some of that cash flow situation out with our contractors, because we know it's difficult for them at the end of the fiscal year. And they also coordinate all of the agency payroll. So we have 1,200 plus employees, and they have to get paid every 2 weeks. And this is a group that manages that process. And then we also have a group of accounts receivable who prepares all of our federal billings, of which there's many. There's FHWA, which is the largest one, but we also work with all of our other federal partners, rail, federal aviation, national highway safety, and so on. We occasionally bill third parties for various agreements that we have on projects. This would include billing towns and other entities for their share of match towards particular projects and whatnot. And then we also do guardrail damage billing. So it's really a collection against an individual's or a corporation's insurance company when they're at fault for damaging some of our assets. We're usually able to collect that via their insurance company.
So collection is pretty good.
Yeah, the collection rate is we have a good process. It's rare that we have to write something off. It does occur, but it is rare.
Does every agency have a Bradley Cooper?
Many agencies have a Bradley Cooper, yes. The CFO position is, it's not always named that, but there is generally somebody that I can think of across all of the major agencies in state government that have a chief financial officer who has similar roles and responsibilities that I do. That's what I had for a presentation of our finance unit.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us in.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Mike Duchette. Good morning.
Do you want me to run this one?
Yeah, if you don't mind, that'd be fantastic.
Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Mike Touchette, the Emergency Management Director for Agency of Transportation.
All right. What do you got for us this morning?
Well, as soon as it comes up here, I can actually have that in front of me. Maybe I can run it instead of just swapping. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. I would look over my shoulder.
Emergency management. Tell us what you do.
So emergency management is much like what you expect from Vermont emergency management, and that we do planning, preparation, training exercises for potential emergency events that impact all sorts of transit mediums within the state of Vermont.
What's an emergency? What do you classify as emergency?
I can give you several examples.
Okay.
most recently, Winter Storm Elliott was a storm that fortunately had very little impact on any transport, roads, rail, airport. However, there was a significant power outages throughout the state of Vermont. But given that storm and the potential for that storm with a host of different elements coming in, wind, rain, ice, snow, we did some planning to make sure that we had the resources and assets available to make sure that Vermonters could still commute if they absolutely needed to. One of the things I'll talk about here as well is, if you recall, the upper elevations were expecting wind gusts of up to 100 miles an hour, coupled with freezing rain, snow, etc. One of our concerns was that cellular towers could be compromised in such an event, and so we wanted to make sure that we had, absent the use of either Wi-Fi from lack of power and or cellular services, that the agency could continue to communicate throughout the state with each other, which would bring me to, sorry, I should put my glasses on so I can actually see what I'm talking about here. Wrong ones. Bullet point 3. So this is actually updated. We do now have 24 staff who are licensed by the FCC to communicate via ham radios, and that's a very rudimentary basic communications tool. It doesn't rely on cell towers or internet or any other services. It's radio frequencies. Hospitals throughout Vermont also use those types of communications. So that redundancy is a big step for us in knowing that should we lose typical communication platforms, that we can continue to communicate. AOT also has satellite capabilities in 2 fashions. One is in a handheld satellite phone, and also through our contract with our cell phone provider, AT&T, we have a product called FirstNet. And first responders are generally have access to that, where AT&T has satellites in the event of loss.
FirstNet, we had a couple of years ago, complaints about FirstNet. Do you remember? I can't remember the details, but the question, how does this interface with the Emergency Management Center at Public Safety? I would assume that, like an Irene event, there'd be a lot of coordination between what you're doing and what that center would be doing.
Certainly. Excuse me, particularly in meteorological events, Irene, Elliott, Vermont Emergency Management did activate. AOT has its own internal incident command structures. We also activated. So we worked very closely with them. COVID, 2 years of COVID, we were very strong partners, supporting many parts of the state government from within AOT by virtue of that relationship with VEM. So I work with them directly fairly routinely, but during the emergency event, we actually have staff that are trained and certified by VEM to be what's called a partner, and they're part of the Mission and Resource Center services, where they will field information requests. So, for example, Department of Labor during COVID had some specific needs relative to supporting unemployment claims, and putting some projects together for that. So we provided some support, but that goes through VEM. They broadcast throughout the state the saying, Department of Labor needs this resource by this date for this long. It comes back to everybody that's a partner, and they'll evaluate who has the best ability and can respond rapidly to that. You know, COVID was certainly a virtual environment versus Elliott, which was an in-person, but I will comment that the virtual environment in many ways had some advantages in that live communications could happen throughout the state using Teams. We had the live chat, call to the war room, for lack of a better term, where we were able to monitor exactly what was happening throughout the state and respond rather quickly, versus having it you know, in person and phone calls, and the broader group got instant updates as to what was happening.
Mike, what triggers a national disaster or national or state disaster of the federal guidelines?
So for FEMA, it's a $1 million threshold.
Okay.
And so, for example, Elliott, at the moment, we're working, we and many of our partners throughout the state, particularly public utilities, are working with FEMA to determine whether or not
Met the threshold.
the minimum threshold is met.
A couple of years ago, there was a lot of damage in Marshfield at Plainton, but it didn't meet the threshold.
Correct. So towns also have a threshold, and I can't speak to specifically about each town's threshold. It is a percentage of their population and their budget, and so it's a mixed way of doing that evaluation.
Because we come up with that figure about $1 million, do we come up with that figure?
That's a FEMA.
They
That's a FEMA
come
value.
in themselves and estimate it?
Yeah. So
Okay.
what, for example, with Elliott, we have with an AOT, we looked at all the damages, all the it includes man hours, it includes special services or equipment or procurement. All of those things add up. AOT saw very little. I mean, we had some trees down that we had to clear, and there's some salting, but that was routine stuff. The tree clearing was different. It was an insignificant amount from
It's
the
a low
storm.
threshold, $1 million. That adds up
It
to that.
is, and I strongly suspect, given the
Yeah,
wide
yeah,
power
that-
outages
they're
throughout the
gonna
state,
change
that
Yeah.
Elliott would hopefully see a declaration where we primarily the towns would see some reimbursement from FEMA. Mount Holly, I think, from what I saw, had actually the most significant damage of any of the towns in the state.
Did the culvert failure on 89 trigger you guys?
So
Or is that just a different level?
it did not trigger the incident command with an AOT. There was certainly some rallying the troops between highways and maintenance and fleet to coordinate their efforts and respond to that. So yeah, that's
Okay, so
not exactly.
was it in the safety realm of where you would be?
Yeah, it was a pretty significant issue with communities being able to travel, but it didn't arise to an emergency situation. So an emergency situation generally is defined by the preservation of life and property. Property could be attributed to this one, but it's a state highway and there's routinely maintenance. And
How would you
sometimes
like to
there's-
be running the emergency center for California?
Oh my God,
AOT.
oh my God.
No, thank you.
What
No,
a mess
thank
there.
you. Yeah, well, even Florida and some of those southern states that routinely, they have some real challenges. Anecdotally, one of the things that I think
Those
is being,
slides are having in California.
I know, the roads are
Roads
underneath and-
Wow. Yeah, they're big projects.
they are.
And then, of course, the snow in the Sierra Nevadas.
Yeah, I think I saw yesterday or a couple days ago that they had 5 years of worth of rain in 2 days.
Wow.
So they're in tough shape. Side note, though, I think it's important to point out is that if the state is really struggling to meet the demands of emergency, they can broadcast throughout the United States saying we need these resources. That would be filtered through Vermont Emergency Management, and again, they would broadcast it out to us, and we could determine whether or not we had the resources. and
Years
assets.
ago, when we sent the plows to Boston.
Yeah, that's right, that's right, yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
How's our relationship with Canada? Is there any issues that have been frictional with the border, coordinating responses to emergencies?
Not that I'm aware of. I have not heard of anything that suggests that. I can tell you from my experience in this position of about 2 years that we've not had an interface with Canada. We routinely have national interface and primarily within New England. It can, for example, when a storm is coming to the New England area, there's generally some coordination about what are your thresholds for chain up requirements or messaging on your variable message boards that you see along the side of the highway. It's just some general coordination amongst the New England region to make sure that we're kind of keep track with the pace of each
Electrical
other.
people have good coordination with other states in the last storm where they come from all over the place. The trucks are pouring in to help out Vermont, and I imagine we'll do the same, but there's reports reversed, but
What is tabled at Rutland Airport, regional tabletop exercises? I assume that's sort of,
Sounds fun.
yeah, sort of like a real evacuation of this building. In other words,
So
sounds so military.
yeah, it is in some ways. It is a planned event where we test a specific infrastructure of the airport. For example, if I am not privy, and I should not be privy to what the actual event will be at Rutland Airport. Part of that is we don't want to kind of queue ourselves up. We want to test how we are in current capacity. But in for example, 2 years ago there was an exercise where they had a small aircraft that had landed, but had a hard landing and caught on fire, and that included the Rutland municipality responses as well, Vermont State Police.
January 12th is passed, so that you had it planned, so it occurred.
That should be the 21st. I apologize. That's a typo on my part. So tabletop exercises are really just to test where are our strengths and where are our opportunities to improve our resiliency. Also notably this year, I mentioned our partners, the partner levels with VEM. We have 9 new staff that are trained and certified by VEM to serve in that role. Previously we had 4, so we've essentially tripled in size in our number of staff that are available to support VEM, particularly during prolonged events. COVID was certainly a long event, and let's hope we don't cross that bridge again. Emergency procedure plans have been developed for all agency district offices, and that's just closed out as of 2 weeks ago. Emergency procedure plans provide specific information for a specific building on if you have to evacuate, here's where you evacuate to, here's your chain of command, here's how you communicate. If you have to transfer to another facility temporarily, here's where it's located at. It identifies our BGS contact so that we can address things fairly quickly. So I think we added 6 new EPPs this year, which are all added to the continuity of operations plan, the COOP. As Bradley had mentioned, we also partner very strongly with FHWA and FEMA, and I'll talk about FEMA after FHWA. Okay, it's not showing on your screen. So this this is a emergency recovery type of event. Once an event has happened, we would evaluate.
Did Alex Portaluppi, was he involved in?
Yes.
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 Okay. Because I know you finally closed out the last grant, and it all got consolidated. So I remember you had kind of a one-man person who was managing that. So, but then he retired, I guess.
He did, yeah.
Probably retired and now working in the federal government.
No, I think he's really retired because we have been in touch with him. He is a wealth of knowledge, and so we have gone back to him a number of times, and we've actually offered to bring him back on board. And he said, "I'm retired. I'm retired." So good for him on that. But in calendar year 22, AFT was able to leverage about $3.2 million in funds, and in 23 we're expecting about 4.2. And much like FHWA, but I would argue that probably more frequent is our partnership with FEMA Public Assistance. Currently, we have 65 ongoing projects, and they can range from relatively small projects to very large projects. Irene, again, I think is for a very long time will be the benchmark for those types of partnerships. And notably, in case you weren't aware, the state actually 2 weeks ago closed out Irene officially. Closed out. Irene is done.
So how much did we get under FEMA from Irene?
That's a difficult question for me to answer, but I can get back to you on that.
Just ballpark, it's gotta be millions and millions.
Yes. Yeah, I worked prior to my position at AOT, I worked with the Agency of Administration who was managing the Waterbury State Office complex response to Irene. That was millions, hundreds of millions.
So FEMA is for example, with the Elliott, they will be our partners for any potential declaration and public assistance that might be available in the state of Vermont following that storm.
They must have got to increase their staff because with the tornadoes and the flooding and everything else, the number of events that are requiring FEMA response seems like it's increased a lot in the last 5 years.
They have, yeah, I think, certainly meteorological events that are damaging are increasing pretty rapidly. I don't know where FEMA is positioned.
No, it's more of a rhetorical
understood.
statement.
Understood. I can tell you that embedded within BEM is a FEMA public assistance director who helps manage. So they're helping to navigate the entire Elliott, bring all the state damages together, and then work with the work with FEMA to determine whether or not that declaration is appropriate and whether or not the state can leverage those funds. I think those are all my slides. So thank you for the opportunity. Are there any questions?
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Eric.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just leave that right there and let Eric. You're up. Yes.
Ring. Yeah.
No, that seems.
We'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, that seemed like an exercise in and of itself.
So you're the
That was my
audit
first
position.
response. Okay.
You check everybody else. Good morning, welcome to the committee.
Well, glad to be here.
Tell us what you do.
Yeah, so my name's Eric Oberon. I'm the acting audit chief at the agency right now. And today I would just like to share with you a few things about what we do in the audit section. First, I just want to start by saying we have basically two missions that we're accomplishing. We help the agency stay compliant with federal, state, and agency laws, rules, and regulations. And we ensure the continued flow of critical federal funding. That's the big picture about what we do.
So you're notified of all the federal funding that comes extra or whatever.
Well, let's just say that we take some time to examine some of the billing that we get. We do indirect cost reviews. Our grants unit does something called subrecipient monitoring.
But you're after the fact, right?
That's right.
To make sure that expenditures are consistent and compliant with the federal rules.
That's right.
And you must have a huge,
But we also do, I mean, it's fair to say that like some consultants have to go through a pre-screening process. And so there's a committee and they decide, okay, well, these 5 consultants look like they can do the job for us. So we will do some pre-contractual screening as well. But most of it is post-fact.
Do you do sampling of billing coming from subs within the state that you guys are reimbursing? Are you looking at every contract that comes through to audit those to make sure that things are good, or how would you manage?
Yeah, well, we do sampling, so we'll start something as simple as an invoice, and then you just dig deeper from there. Just with the work authorizations. We compare, most importantly, we have on file all the billing rates that they've submitted to us. And so part of it is just making sure that whatever they're billing us for is what they said they'd be billing us for. That's a big picture of what we're doing. Does this, how do we forward this? Slides.
You could just push the down arrow, or you could scroll.
Push the right arrow key, it jumps to the next page.
Okay. So, the audit bureau is divided into two sections. We have the internal audit and grants compliance, and we also have the records management group. And there are a total of 8 of us working in the audit section. The core tasks of what we are accomplishing on the internal audit and grants compliance side. So we've got external auditor and regulator, liaison, sub-recipient monitoring, consultant financial reviews, internal controls and compliance reviews, performance audits, and on the records management side, it's records management, public records requests, scanning operations, reprographics, documentation system support.
Yes,
I should know this. What is reprographics?
It's basically reproducing images.
Okay.
Fancy word for.
Never heard that term before. I like
You can use it
reprographics.
in your other job.
right. You learned something here.
There you go.
You beef up your resume with that.
So Bradley, I have a question for you, because you worked in agency administration. Do most agencies have a separate audit function?
It varies across the state, but the larger agencies,
Maybe ag wouldn't, that's tiny.
I think that's it. I'm not familiar with their work chart specifically, but that would be kind of the difference.
Would this be a variation of fiscal quality control?
In a sense, I mean, my take on it, I'm still relatively just 3 months on the job. But my understanding is this, the audit group within the agency of transportation was originally formed because they wanted to make sure, the feds wanted to make sure that they weren't going to be overcharged for all of this federal money that's being spent. And so that was the original purpose of the group. And some of our role has expanded. We do internal audits now, we do performance audits, but that was the core thing that we were originally brought into for. So other agencies may do certain kinds of auditing, but that kind of auditing that we do is.
But then we have the single state audit.
That's right. So the state, that's what I was about to talk about here. We do external audit liaison. And so throughout the year, we facilitate external audits from the state auditor's office and Clifton Larson Allen. And Clifton Larson Allen is a private audit firm utilized by the state auditor's office to audit state agencies. And really, that amounts to a huge paper chase. It's document request. It's pretty extensive. And so this happens every year. It turns out this year, the Agency of Transportation was not chosen for single audit, but in past years we have. And it's important to note that we also have liaison with other federal regulators, Federal Transit Administration, Federal Railroad, Aviation, FEMA. But primarily, we work very closely with Federal Highway. We have monthly check-ins with them, and where we talk about this process, which is basically improper payment reviews. And they're basically auditing us to make sure that we are completing our fiduciary responsibilities. And so, in fact, they do these periodic audits maybe 5-6 times a year. And again, it's the same reason they audit, just to make sure that the agency is not being overcharged for work completed utilizing federal funds.
So like program audits, I'm thinking about, remember the issue with the bridge construction, J.A. McDonald? Would that have involved the audit office as well? So it would relate to?
Not necessarily. It could be, we would be auditing some of the transactions that came out of that.
Right.
It is possible in some cases, we haven't done it, but larger comprehensive audits of a single construction project. If we were to undertake something like that, we would probably use an outside audit firm to help us because it's quite a job, actually. So we are, in a sense, we usually have a piece of that, a small piece.
The federal requirements that inspired the creation of your area, how long ago was that? Are you relatively a newer part of our V-Trans?
I am not sure about that, actually. I don't know the actual specific time frame, but. Some of the other important review work that we do, invoice reviews, which was already kind of discussed, purchasing card reviews, contract reviews, personal use of state-owned vehicle reviews.
Well, how many pieces of paper come across your desk?
I don't think you're using state-owned vehicles for personal use.
Well, I mean, what happens is some of the districts, they have cars that are available to them, and because we do a lot of off-site work, some of our employees use these vehicles to go on site. If we were all just working in office, you probably wouldn't see that as much.
Senator Kitchell, if I may, for the record, Jana Morse, Director of Finance and Administration. And we have several staff within our team as well as across the agency that are assigned vehicles to take home in many cases because they need to respond directly from home in the event of a significant incident or they're on road patrol, that type of thing. So we do have some vehicles that are not stored at a garage overnight.
It's the definite, the use of personal use.
Personal use of state vehicles.
And I'm sure they're not taking, well, there was a whole host of discussion around it, like if I have to, if I don't have a state vehicle and I'm driving past my child's daycare center, can I pick up my child on the way home? Or do I have to go home and pick up my own personal car? Is that the kind of, but obviously we have rules that you don't take that vehicle to go shopping,
Right.
Or
we wouldn't intentionally take a vehicle out on a trip specifically to go shopping, but it's been allowable for somebody who is passing on their way home to stop and say, get gas while for their state vehicle and also perform a personal purchase. And things like that are not necessarily considered a personal use of state vehicle. But there are situations where you might leave from your residence, and there's a policy around this, around a certain number of miles that you may travel, where it becomes a reportable personal use trip versus a commuter trip, that type of thing. So we're they do, every pay period. We're very diligent with tracking and monitoring that report.
And there's a process for documenting all that.
I'm sure there is.
We have
I'm sure you have a code for it. You have a code for everything.
and I mean, to give you an idea, we can't do all audits, but year to year, we choose areas to focus on. So, two most important internal tasks that we do, grants compliance and financial reviews. There are over 250 subrecipients statewide that require monitoring. And this task is shared with other agencies as well. But the agency that has the most grant money in play, it becomes the Cognizant agency. And so, for example, in fiscal year 22, AOT was the Cognizant agency for 121 grant subrecipients. And this monitoring work that we do is actually very time intensive, at least a dozen steps. And we used to be a group back a couple of years ago. We had 5 people, and then pandemic hit, and we had some change in turnover, and we ended up with a group of only 2. We had 2 people who were actually fielding all of this work. We've grown our numbers again, but the grants compliance work is something that has been increasing with each passing year. It seems to be more and more that we're trying to do, and the towns are having, they're struggling also to stay compliant, only because they don't have enough people in the right places or they don't understand the process. So we do a lot of educational outreach. It's part of what we do. And then, of course, the financial reviews, as I was explaining, throughout the year, we receive financials from all these consultant firms. We verify their rates, and that goes into our database. Records management. Well, the audit section is actually currently working with the state archivist to implement new records retention schedules for the Agency of Transportation. This is a large undertaking, and we're pretty excited to be at the beginning of this. And in addition, the agency is in the process of moving towards cloud-based storage. Previously, we had on-base storage systems, but this move to the cloud is also a very big initiative. A lot of people involved with making that happen correctly. Public records requests are also a pretty key thing that we take care of. It's one of the essential tasks that we complete. This process is time sensitive and generally needs to be completed within 3 business days. So a little statistic there, 94.5% of requests were processed within 3 days last year. To give you an idea, that's 401 public records requests fulfilled in fiscal year 22, accounting for 13,743 pages of records.
Do you consider any of these be a nuisance to the point where we should revisit some of the controls and constraints and what we can charge back to the people requesting these things? I've heard some commentary with other departments that this can be somewhat onerous and problematic from certain individual sources.
I think there are some specific instances that are quite time consuming. As an example, we've had students who have sent requests to us because they're working on the paper or a thesis, and so they use us as a kind of a research hub. I mean, it's not a nuisance, but it's time consuming.
We charge for them, correct? We do when they reach a certain threshold. We have a way to bill. Do we bill enough to compensate for the time that these things cost?
No, I think not. Or the next thing is get it paid. That's the other issue.
It's a good question. I haven't put an honest thought to that, but
You're on finance, are you? I know the reason.
So document management, again, that's getting back to reprographics, high speed, high volume reformatting and scanning of physical records, large volume, large format reprographics, maintaining document imaging systems. Or what the records group does. And I mean, here's a fun fact for you: 236,770 physical pages scanned and indexed in calendar year 22. So we're a pretty busy group considering our size.
Square feet, measure it square feet. You sit there with a ruler and measure it. Wow.
Anyway, that is kind of a general overview of what we do. Any questions?
No, a lot of stuff.
It is. And we're growing. I mean, I've hired a few people recently, and we're, trying to get back up to full speed.
When they say the cloud, we know it's not in the cloud. Where is it?
It's a big computer farm someplace.
Dark basements,
Yeah.
large data centers.
That's right. It's still a data center, it just doesn't happen to be in your building, it's somewhere else.
You think it's up there floating?
Yeah. When they say a cloud, you think it's up there somewhere. That's a good question.
So we should take a tour of the data center. We can go see.
So that's data from what, Vermont?
Well, University of Vermont's data center. Do you know where the whale's tails are? The old digital plant. So right in the center there, that's where UVM's data center is, and that's one place where you.
So there is a place that you pay to have it all stored.
There's others. So there's just a high concentrated computational facility that Dell or whoever the provider is paying for those resources, and they're often replicating across different locations. So
how long do you keep it in storage?
Depends on what your retention records are and what the content is.
And after so many years, you can.
So, I mean, as an example, I mean, this is how the records group can add value, because it turns out cloud-based storage is expensive. And so part of our job is using these retention schedules to reduce the amount of data that we're sending to those data centers. Right. So these are up and coming tasks for us as we go ahead.
purging schedule.
Disposition.
I need to have a purging schedule.
All right, well, thank you very much.
My record
you.
protection system.